If you want to talk about a picture of true love, of sacrificial love, of love for humanity, if there's any sort of picture of racial unity and love, it's on that sidewalk. As people are reaching across racial lines to literally save lives and to offer hope, help, resources, and a total change in direction in one's life.
I am yours, I am yours, I am yours, send me, Lord, I am yours.
Welcome to the Gospel Center Pro-Life Podcast. In this episode, we have an interview with Melissa Pellew, who talks to us about abortion and racism in America. Please join us as we cover this topic from a gospel-centered perspective.
I felt your passion, I've touched your heart. Use me, Lord, use me, Lord.
Welcome to the Gospel Center Pro-Life Podcast. Appreciate you guys listening. We have a special guest with us today, and we're going to talk about a special subject and a difficult subject for many of us to deal with and to think through, but hopefully we'll be able to help you guys think through this subject together. And it's the subject of abortion in light of race relations, and just with all the things that we've got going on in our nation with the killing of George Floyd and all the other issues that surround this. We really thought that we need to talk about abortion in light of those things. And who better to talk about this with than Melissa Pellew? She's been involved in pro-life ministry for a long time. When I first got involved in pro-life ministry, she was involved, and we've known each other for a long time. Her and her husband, Devin, just been a blessing to the ministry of Cities for Life. And so we wanted to bring her on. And we also have Vicky on the line, just so you guys know we're on a Skype call here, so the audio might not be exactly what it normally is, but we hope it will still be a blessing to you guys. But yeah, say hey, Vicky.
Hey there, everyone.
Hopefully you can hear Vicky well. And then just introduce yourself real quick, Melissa, and what you and Devin are doing there on the college campus.
Absolutely. So my name is Melissa Pellew. My husband's Devin. We are the chapter directors at Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina, with a ministry called Ratio Christi, which is Latin for the reason of Christ. So we do apologetics evangelism ministry, where we are training college students to understand more about what they believe, why they believe it. So we deal with a number of different issues associated with a lot of the ideas, secular ideas that are kind of infiltrated the college campus, and then also evangelize students of other worldviews, whether they are Muslim or skeptic, atheist, what have you. So we deal with quite a bit of issues related to, God's existence and how we can trust the Bible, but also these ethical issues like abortion we deal with quite a bit. So our training on the sidewalk has really been beneficial. Just, being on the sidewalk and talking to abortion-minded women and families has been very beneficial as we're communicating how to have those conversations and defending the pro-life issue on the college campus with students who many times don't affirm the sanctity of human life. So we are very thankful. You can look us up, Ratio Christi at Winthrop University, and we're just blessed to be here today.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on. And we did a podcast a couple of months ago with Devin talking about some issues with pro-life apologetics and things like that. It was a real blessing to us, real blessing to have him join us on that. But we've got you on, and can anybody guess why we would have Melissa on when we're talking about race relations? Why would we have you on, Melissa?
Well, if we were on video, it'd be evident. But I am indeed Black, and like you said, being involved in pro-life activism for so long on the sidewalk and just in different areas, doing conferences and trainings and things like that, having that experience. But it is not a commonality. It's not very common to have a lot of Black pro-life activists. So I think that might be why you brought me on. I'm not sure though. But.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, we brought you on because you're a godly woman that has a godly perspective. So that's the first thing. But you happen to be a Black woman, and you have some experience in dealing with race from a perspective that I don't have and that Vicky don't have. And so we thought to bring you in this conversation because, like you said, there is unfortunately a scarcity of Black individuals within the pro-life movement, even though it's becoming more and more from what I see. Is that what you're seeing too?
Yeah, I think people are starting to at least think about the issue a lot more. But I'm really been blessed to see on the Saturday mornings with the prayer walks, a lot of Black churches in the Charlotte area really becoming active and participating. So from that perspective, I'm really encouraged.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
for
I'm
sure.
encouraged as well.
Hmm.
So, like I said before we got started with this, I'm going to ask you some questions. It's going to be real relational, and I just want you to talk. I want you to share your heart. I want people to understand from a Black woman's perspective the issue of abortion and dealing with, race and dealing with abortion in light of race and all of that. And I think it will help us to understand because, let's face it, Melissa, you've been out there, Vicky, you've been out there for many years too. And you've seen the majority of the women going into the Latrobe abortion clinic are unfortunately Black women that are going in. And so it's a reality that we deal with on a regular basis, dealing with race, dealing with women who are not the same color as us, and trying to see from their perspective, trying to see, for me, from a woman's perspective is really hard, but trying to see from a Black woman's perspective is even harder, So we want to get some perspective from you. And I do want to talk about kind of the larger picture of things. And that's where I want to start, if you don't mind. And I want to start with the idea of systematic racism or systemic racism. Is this, in your opinion and from your experience, is this a reality in our country?
Yeah, so that is, a very hot button issue, right? Systemic racism. And, or some people call it structural racism or institutional racism. Those are kind of synonyms. And just to give a general popular definition of what we're talking about, for those who are not aware, when we're talking about racism, the sin of racism in terms of, individuals who have racist intent and motives, and they prejudge people, and they have racist attitudes towards someone else, or attitude of superiority based on skin color. So we would recognize that as racism. I think all people would. And then with systemic racism, the general popular definition would be something along the lines of the social or economic, political, educational, legal systems as well, that they would say that those systems in our country are designed in a systematic way, a foundational way, to oppress minorities and to somehow grant or set white people up for success or some sort of to in a superior way. So the systems, systemically, the systems of the country are all designed to basically oppress Black people. And it's just, and so from the perspective of someone who holds to that, not myself, I'm just saying from the perspective of someone who holds to that.
Sure, yeah.
When they look at the world or they look at opportunities, they would feel that there's a minority would feel like they are set up for failure from the moment that they're born, that they're not on equal footing or equal set up. That things are not equally set up for minorities and white people. So part of the, and I'll tell you that question is hard to answer.
It's kind of a loaded question, isn't it? It was intended to be. I wanted to kind of get your reaction on that.
Yeah. I'll unpack why it's hard to answer, because there are there are various definitions. Even, I mean, if you go to to some scholarship and academic and on a secular campus versus some of the popular definitions that are in a lot of the books that are out now. But and that's why I think that the issue itself, it's so ambiguous, this idea of systemic racism, that I don't think it's something that a person can hold tightly onto and affirm in a dogmatic way. So I know that's not a yes or no answer, but
yeah, I mean, it's actually kind of what I was aiming at. Vicky, you want to pipe in on this?
Well, no, I totally agree with you, Melissa, because I've
Mhm,
been really grappling, and I just
mhm,
wrote a note to a friend who is very much involved in I guess eradicating systemic racism, and said, the
mhm.
more I read, actually, the more confused
The
I
more
am.
confusing it is, right. It,
Yeah.
it, it is a very confusing issue, an area, because what you're looking at, basically, it's a social theory, right? So
Hmm.
with theories, what you're doing is you're looking at data and you're looking at different things. And so what the person who's saying the systemic racist social theorist, they're looking at disparities, right? So they're saying there's economic disparities between whites and blacks. There's educational disparities. There's private property disparities, right? So
Hmm.
they're looking at those disparities and saying, well, there has to be some systemic reason that that is happening. But this does the problem when you just narrow it down to that is that you don't take into account other factors, things like marriage, right? Even when you look at economics with Black children, if they are raised in a two-parent family, there's only about a 7% poverty rate. Okay.
Mm.
And and you compare that with white children who are raised in a two-parent home, there's about a 22% poverty rate. Okay.
Well, that's an
So
amazing statistic. I have never heard that.
hmm So yeah, Black children raised in two-parent homes typically don't are not impoverished, and so
Hmm.
that and I think that so that's what I'm saying. It's hard to blame or to pin these disparities solely on these systemic issues when there are these personal issues, these individual issues. There's cultural issues with again with marriage and with how think mindsets and the choices. It kind of
Hmm.
it does remove personal responsibility from the
Hmm.
equation, right? So
Hmm.
you're able
Yeah.
to just say that I can't achieve this or I can't do this or I'm doing this because things are just set up and stacked against me. And things when we really look at it, we don't want to disparage think like if we're going to say that all these privilege, for instance, that there's things, marriage privilege, like I brought up, right? There's privilege when you're born into a family with two parents. So
Right.
we don't want to destroy those, like marriage, for instance, right? Because
Yeah.
there's disparities, right? So it's just a very abstract thing to me. Now, I believe the answer is to just look at individual policies and to see if there are policies that do harm, Black people, whether intentional or unintentional. I think if you take
Hmm.
that approach, then it's more defined. It's more based on real life and data and things like that. But if
Yeah.
when you're just this whole idea that's what's happened. It's take this whole idea and we're looking at all these disparities without looking at just maybe individual policies and things like that may need to be changed. But in general, I don't hold firmly to the idea of systemic racism just because it's ambiguous, and I'd rather look at individual areas where there may be some things that are unfair and deal with it from that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Well,
Mhm,
I did want to touch on that again as a big picture question
mhm,
because it's a question that a lot of we hear it again. It's like a buzzword in the media, systemic
mhm,
racism, and this idea of
mhm,
systemic racism. And when certain statistics and certain things are laid out to me, I'm like, well, yeah, there's a system in place that seems to be bent against minorities, against Black people, and but then you look at other statistics and it's like
mhm,
what you shared, it's like,
mhm,
man, all things equal, there's not this
mhm.
systemic racism, and so it's really confusing, and it's really
Yeah.
hard for me again as a white man to come from that perspective and to see that. And so
Mhm,
yeah, I wanted to hear your perspective, but now just to kind of bring it into to what we really want to talk about,
mhm,
which is the issue of abortion and racism,
mhm,
because there's no doubt, you mentioned it when we first started, the sin of racism exists. And
Absolutely.
I think you would probably agree that it's going to exist until Jesus returns, no matter how much we
Absolutely.
try to fight against it. It's like any other
Absolutely.
sin, and it does have its
Absolutely.
own unique issues that it causes, of course. So I'm not trying to
Mhm.
marginalize that as just any other sin. It has issues that it
Mhm.
brings. But like every sin, only Jesus Christ is going to remedy that. So
Mhm.
that's a reality, and I appreciate you saying that. But it
Mhm.
does at least the issue of race and abortion do come up in a lot of conversations, and just like I said, on a day-to-day basis in our outreach, we deal with young Black women going into the abortion centers, and I've been called a racist so many
Yeah.
times I can't even count. And
Right.
I'm sure you, Melissa, you can correct me if I'm
Oh, I
wrong,
have
being
too.
out there at the abortion clinic, you've probably been called a racist or called whatever
I have.
kind. Yeah.
Lots of names, yeah, that I won't want to repeat, but yeah, sell out, things like that, of course. Yep.
Yeah,
I have.
yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of funny the way that people just kind of throw these terms out there. But
Mhm.
how do the issues in your mind of racism and abortion intersect in the United
Right.
States of America?
Right. So again, we affirm that racism exists. And so because the heart is sinful, right? We love darkness rather than light. And as long as we are in that condition, we can, as long as we're human, we can have sinful attitudes. And racism is a sinful way of thinking and looking at the world. Now, as we look at the issue of abortion, we look at the reality that abortion kills unborn minority children at a much higher rate than the national average. And we're talking about a minority population where you have 16 million Black children who have died due to abortion. We're talking about the number one killer of the Black community, where
Yeah.
it's 5 times higher for abortion to occur in a Black family than a white family. So when we look at the history of abortion, and we bring if so looking at those stats of abortion now being the number one killer of the Black community, we look at the history with the abortion movement in America. Of course, Miss Margaret Sanger was the proponent, and she had her thoughts were based on a eugenics model. And a
Yeah.
eugenics, and I know you had talked to Devin with that in a previous show. A eugenics model is basically designed where you look at humans based on their potential, their function, what they can what they can give to society. And some people are considered non-useful in that way. And so Black people, because of all of the slavery and all civil rights, all these things that we're going through, the largely uneducated Black population, they were included in that eugenics model of those that Margaret Sanger deemed unworthy. The Negro Project, I think it was 1932, was aimed at the Black community, where the pastors were encouraging the use of birth control and that. So population control was basically the idea. And if we look at the numbers, we see a population control issue. So when a
Yeah.
population is targeted because of their skin color, that is racism, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
we look at the presence of the abortion clinics in poor and minority areas, that is a marketing tool that is designed to normalize abortion and to target that community. When you place a business in a certain community, you are targeting that community. It's there for a purpose. And so the fact that the roots of abortion were based on a eugenics model that targeted Black people for population control, and then the fact that we now have abortion clinics in majority Black neighborhoods, we have now abortion as the number one killer of Black people. It is completely tied to racism because of the targeting based on skin color.
Right. It also, I like what you said about the root issue, because I think the root issue is very similar in
Mm-hmm.
the killing of the unborn and racism. In both cases, the value of the
The
just
value.
intrinsic human value of
Mm-hmm.
a people group is questioned, is put into
Right.
question. And as soon as that happens, then you can harm that class of humans because you feel that their value is less than yours. And that's
Right.
true for the unborn, and that's
Dehumanization.
true for the minorities.
That has been true throughout all of history, right? Dehumanization of population,
Exactly.
whether it's
Exactly.
the Jews, whether it's the blacks,
Mhm.
now it's babies. And one of the sad realities is when we look at civil rights and we look at oppression against black people, and I mean, what the black population has been through in this country from 400 years, from slavery from 400 years to where we are now, is just remarkable, in my opinion. It's just amazing what God has done through many people who fought for rights, and who stood boldly and courageously for those rights. But what you
Mhm.
find is when people are oppressed for so long, many times they become oppressors themselves. And this
Right.
is sometimes very unconsciously because of a sense of a loss of power and things of that nature. So we now see Black women, Black families killing their own children. And this is
Mhm.
an act of oppression because, like you said, Vicky, the dehumanization of that child in the womb.
Mhm.
And that is what allows that is a process that will, that leads to these children's death. So it's a
Right.
very sad reality that what happens, from the racist attitudes and targeting the community, and then people internalize it, right? And they themselves become the oppressors. That has historically happened in pretty much every other civilization as well.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, that's
And
Melissa. That's a unique perspective there that you
Mhm.
bring
mhm,
that up, and that kind of brings me to another one of the points that I want to touch on because what you just said, and I have to process it. I take your word for it, and I
mhm,
believe you're telling me the truth for sure. I'd have to process it to think about it, but even if
mhm,
I did fully agree with what you just said, can I even voice that? And so what I'm
mhm,
asking is, is it the place of, for a pro-life white man like myself to say
mhm,
things like what you just said, or to point out some of
mhm,
the issues with Planned Parenthood, with Margaret Sanger. I mean, we got the toppling of statues across this country of Confederate soldiers and all of that. We're not going to get into that subject. But as I look
mhm.
at that, I'm thinking, man, they should be toppling the statues of Margaret Sanger and getting these things because
Mhm.
she's
Absolutely.
like
Even
provable as
worse.
a racist, right? But
Yeah.
is it my place? Is it Vicky's
Mhm,
place as a white pro-lifers to address those issues? And then
mhm,
if it is our place, how do we address those issues without it just being a
mhm,
landmine, if
mhm.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It is a difficult area to navigate through, because you do want to be sensitive, but truth is truth, right? The
Yeah.
word of God is unchanging. It is our standard. And so my short answer would be yes, you should address that, speak on that, talk about that reality, because it is a sinful, the sin of abortion, the effects are so profound on the Black community. And so,
Mhm.
yes, I encourage my white brothers and sisters to talk about that and to not back down from God's truth. Now, as far as talking about it and how we do it, I think that is maybe more of the question, Daniel, of how do we do that?
Yeah.
Right.
Do we
Yeah,
do
I
we
guess the context that I'm speaking to
yeah.
is, I think there's a national context, certainly for
Mhm,
pro-life leaders, for politicians, even to be speaking about this. But the context primarily I'm speaking to is at the abortion center with an abortion-minded mom, as I'm sharing some of the statistics and some of the things, because you get into those heated conversations, they want to come over and set you straight.
mhm.
And sometimes I almost am, well, I'm actually very careful and walking on eggshells if I bring up the issues of the fact that abortion clinic is located in a minority neighborhood,
Yeah.
that there's
Mhm,
also another abortion clinic just around the corner, and that you're not going to
mhm,
find those abortion clinics in a white neighborhood. You're just not going to
mhm.
find it. So I guess
Right.
that's more the context I'm speaking of.
Yeah.
Is it my place to say that? How do I need to address that? and not
Right.
make it into just a racial fight, because that's not what I'm trying to get into with an abortion-minded mom, you know?
Right, right. You're at that point, you don't, I mean, you're not trying to get into the deeper issues of race and race relations, right? You want her to see that that child is worthy of life, and that God designed that child, and that she should not murder her child. So again, I think just and for being on the sidewalk, maybe I can share some of the things I've heard that I thought were insensitive
Yeah,
or not,
yeah, please do.
you
That would
know,
be helpful.
yeah, just saying that, your black baby matters, or your black baby this, or your black baby that. I think we need to be careful about saying that. I mean, in this culture, I mean, golly, people are so triggered, and with everything going on, we need to maybe be careful about that. And just even with, Black Unborn Lives Matter, just with that whole thing with Black Lives Matter, because it's such a it's such a convincing movement to a lot of people. That can trigger some things for people, where they just shut down and they're not going to talk to you, or they're going to make certain assumptions about you. I think for those issues, it is better dealt with in an ongoing situation. Like if you have someone that you're engaging, a car that you stopped, and that you want to, and you're talking to them, and you can talk to them about how this place is a place that is is a white supremacist tool. I think in a conversation that's very good. I don't think that it should be the first thing you bring up, but I think it does have its place, because ultimately this is a humanity issue. And so, and that's one thing too. I think that even within the pro-life community, we with the George Floyd and the Breonna Taylor and the Ahmaud Arbery, I don't think the answer is just to deflect to, oh well, abortion is the number one killer, in those cases automatically, because I think we have an opportunity to say that was wrong what happened to George Floyd, for that police officer to kill him that way. I mean, watching that video, and this man asking for his mom, regardless of his past choices or that, but asking for his mom and being murdered right there on a video in front of us, that was difficult. So I think we can say, that those things are horrible, and that God does not approve in the appropriate situations. Not every racial incident obviously is an issue of racism that's reported in the media, but verifiable issues that we want to show that we care, right? That that we care about humanity. And just, it's such a touchy issue. But I just think sometimes if you're on a microphone and just talking about race, or doing a race education class, isn't necessarily the best time, at least right now.
Yeah.
But I think talking about humanity itself, I think that is a great way to reach people, because the idea, what media is reinforcing in a lot of the books now and everything, is that white people don't see you as a person. White people don't see you as equal. White people are part of this system, when we talk about systemic racism, white people are part of that whole system that's holding you down. They don't care about you, and they just want to oppress you, and they think that they're better than you. So be aware that this is a mindset that a person, not all the time, 100% of the time, but many times a Black person that's their perception coming to the situation, right? And so when they pull in and they see a bunch of white people there, we gotta somehow connect with their humanity. And that's really important, because we want to show them that we're all equal, and so is that child,
Right.
and
All made in the image of God. And I think that is the uniting and one of the most powerful things we can say in terms of connecting as human beings. We are all made in God's image.
Slogans that I use now even are Black lives are sacred. Black lives matter to God. I think those, even signs that say things like that I think are helpful, because it shows that we care about the sanctity of all human life, So but it is difficult, Daniel. It's even difficult for me sometimes to talk. Well, it might be easier for me to talk about it than maybe for yourself. So,
well, I'll tell you just from experience in which the issue of race, as much because recently, especially, I have stayed away from any conversations about race, about the fact that more black babies are killed by abortion than are born. I mean, I don't even say that commonly now as I'm talking to abortion-minded women or calling out there. I just don't make race an issue because to me, really, it's not an issue. You know what I mean? As far as like whether you're killing your black child or your white child or your Hispanic child, whatever, you're killing a child and it's wrong.
Right.
But as much as I
saying that, the media is reinforcing this racial division over and over and over and over, and so we have to find a way to unite and bring these people to the understanding that we're all created in the image of God. So I think that's the message that we want to communicate. That's going to resonate in this world that's so divided.
Yeah.
Right.
I know. Just recently, I'd say since the George Floyd murder and all this racial tension and stuff, it seems like I've heard more and more of the people walking into the abortion center of accusations of racism toward myself.
Yeah.
What are you talking to me, white boy out there?
Yeah.
Would you say that's the
that
case,
today.
Vicky?
Oh, we heard it today. There was an angry exchange where we were being called racist because we were offering help. I don't know why we were. We certainly had not made any racist remark, but that's where it started off as saying, of course, you've heard this 1,000 times, you should not be judging, you're judging us. And then ultimately that we were racist because we were judging what were predominantly black women at that point walking into the abortion center.
Well, also be aware of, the number one bestseller in the New York Times right now is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And she's a sociologist who basically says that all white people are racist. Okay. So whether subconsciously, whether you realize it or not, your whiteness has blinded you to your racism, and that you can come to repent. She doesn't call it repentance, but you can come to realize that your whiteness is in a sense evil. And so this is the number one bestseller. Okay.
Wow.
And it's written by a white woman. Okay. Yeah. And so she's saying that white people are racist just for you to say that you're not a racist. It's just your white fragility showing, which is you are trying to defend yourself. So
you're doomed. I mean, there's nothing you can say or do to prove or disprove. You are instantly labeled, and there's no way out of that.
So that's what I'm
saying. So Melissa, are you saying then, just for for the listeners who are, because a lot of our listeners are daily out at the abortion centers, and that's a lot of our listener base are sidewalk counselors and stuff like that. So would you say then the best thing to do in those situations where, let's say, an abortion-minded mom walking in who just happens to be black yells back at you and says, "You're a racist." So the best response to that would just be to ignore that and talk about humanity. Is that right?
Absolutely. Because if you go and defend yourself, that is seen as in terms of modern theory, critical race theory, and things like that. That is seen as you're showing your racism more. Because this is why you'll see people in these videos or these talks, or even people, even friends, Christian friends of mine, which is sad. You'll see them kind of, in a sense, repent of their whiteness, right? They are so sorry for. I don't know if they know what they're sorry for, but they're sorry and they're repentant to white people, right? So that is seen as that is seen as a good thing, because they're acknowledging and they're woke enough to understand their whiteness is evil. Okay. Now, when you defend it, it shows that you're fragile and this sort of thing. So I would. So regardless if you try to defend yourself or not, you're still racist.
It's kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
So to get that would be So just focus on humanity. Try to speak through that you care about that individual. And those things. That's all you can do in those situations, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that just came to mind is I'm not out there as a white man. I'm out there as a Christian. That's primarily why I'm out there. If I wasn't a Christian, I wouldn't be out at the abortion center at all. I wouldn't care about those babies or those women or anything. So, we're speaking out of our love for God, our love for people. So I appreciate you saying that and sharing all of that.
just point people to Christ in those situations, because if you if you get caught up in that, you're not going to be able to have a fruitful exchange, I don't
It
believe.
ends up just becoming a distraction. I mean, I'll just say, there's a temptation as a a young black woman is walking into the abortion center, and she calls out to me and calls me a racist. There's a temptation in me to just lay out the statistics and talk about Planned Parenthood's history, talk about Margaret Sanger and all of that. But like you said, it just becomes a distraction. It becomes really a conversation that's not immediately helpful, even though it could be helpful if we were able to sit down and talk at length. In that scenario, it's just not helpful. And yeah, I hear you saying that. That's good advice for sure.
Yeah, I hope that helps. Yeah, but yes, if you just become with, like I said, some of the modern literature that's coming out now on systemic racism and white privilege and things like that, you really it's very deep, and so you're not going to come to a resolution in those quick conversations, I don't believe.
Yeah. Well, I want us to shift the conversation just a little bit here, if we can, and talk about pro-life issues in the Black community and just your experience with that, because a lot of folks don't understand why the Black community, from my perspective, because abortion has disproportionately affected the Black community. A lot of folks don't understand why these issues aren't addressed in the Black community, or maybe they are and we're just not hearing it, obviously, because we're not, involved on a regular basis within the Black community, whatever, I put air quotes there because, we're talking about different communities and segments of communities. But within the Black community, are these issues talked about? And if they're not talked about, then why? And if they are, how are they addressed?
Yeah, I find from the political groups, that is a big problem, is the politics, right? Because you have your groups like the NAACP and the Congressional Black Caucus and these who are basically very intertwined with Planned Parenthood in these mutual relationships. And so for the Black community, it's like, oh, it's okay for them, they're okay with Planned Parenthood, so I can be okay with Planned Parenthood. But I think that the abortion issue in general is not talked about in our community, and I think because of it's affected so many Black people, right? It's something that honestly, I doubt my mom will be listening to this, but it's something I've never even with my mom, I've never asked. I know that I have several friends who have had abortions when I was growing up, in my teenage years, and they've never said anything else about it. It's something that it's happening, but it's not talked about. And
so are you saying it's more like there's a shame factor there because so many have been affected by abortion, or it's kind of like the skeletons in the closet sort of thing?
I think it's a lot of skeletons in the closet that families don't talk about. And so it is, and you think about it from there's kind of a general silence, I would say, right? So then you have somebody like me who's always talking about it, and sometimes I'll get messages from people or even a family that says, I had an abortion and, this is a very important issue for me. Thank you for what you're doing. I've talked to Black women that I've gone to church with over time. As I've talked more about abortion, they've started to say, I've had 2 abortions, I've had 4 abortions, people that I would have never thought or knew. So it's just there's just a general silence about it, and so I think that's more of a reason to talk about it. Because I do want to see people healed, right? I want to see people healed in Jesus and not carrying that around. And we need more post-abortive ministries in Black churches. But then even just thinking about the abortion issue, how to, that it's a sin and how, that it's taking innocent human life. You just don't hear that in sermons. You don't hear that in discussions at all. And so there's kind of this and I think what it is, like, we were talking earlier about this oppressor-oppressed situation, right? Where someone who feels oppressed for so long, they will tend to oppress someone else. So it's almost like killing our own is okay, right? it is something that's accepted. It's something that we don't talk about a whole lot, but the statistics speak for themselves. So it's happening on a regular, accelerated basis. But then when we have a police officer who who unfairly kills one of us, then that is the time that we speak out, right? And we get infuriated. So there is just this very double standard in our community. I mean, when you're talking about things, even with those I think it was Planned Parenthood campaign, or it may have been the Now campaign, shout your abortion. Remember, talk about your abortion, shout your abortion. Who was that? Educated white women who were doing that.
Right.
You don't see a lot of Black women participating in these things. Now, Planned Parenthood has had some targeted campaigns to try to bring Black women into that, and they have participated. But on a everyday level of the average person, you just don't see Black people shouting their abortion. And so it is very taboo, but it continues to happen repeatedly, obviously. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's a answer in terms of why that is, but I know that needs to change. I think.
Yeah. One of the things that I would echo that you are saying about how it so needs to change. Recently, I did have a woman, a mother, and her mother stopped for me, very abortion minded. I don't even know why they stopped. But as the discussion proceeded, the mother of the pregnant daughter admitted that she had had a number of abortions, and that her daughter hadn't known that. She had known maybe her mother had had one or two, but her mother had had a number of them. And then the mother proceeded to cry and talk about the pain and the sorrow and the despair that had been hidden from this daughter. And ultimately, the daughter got on the RV, chose life. But it struck me how when any sin is in darkness, it's hidden, it just grows, it multiplies. And if the children are seeing that, they know their moms have had abortions, but it's never talked about it, and it's never talked about in a negative way. Well, they do what they see and what they've learned from their parents, and so it's perpetuated.
Yeah, and if you don't hear about it, if you're going to church every Sunday and you never hear about it, and no one talks about it, I mean, I had no idea how to think about abortion, and so until I got, even after I got saved, I never thought about it. I never heard about it, and it was through radio. I heard a radio information ad, and I just started thinking about it more. But it's not something that's talked about. Now you do have people like Bishop Patrick Luton, I think he's up in Raleigh, who is so outspoken. And then you have your Voddie Bauchams and those guys who are just, all about pro-life issues, and Benjamin Watson,
Pastor Gabriel Rogers here in Charlotte speaks about the issue of abortion on a regular basis. He's one of the churches that you mentioned that comes out to the prayer walks. These men of God are just awesome in addressing the issue.
Yeah. Benjamin Watson he was a NFL. He played in the NFL. He just retired. He's my pastor's son. He's my pastor's oldest son, and he's actually spoken at the March for Life, and he's working on a pro-life documentary. He's trying to get more Black people to talk about it and for it to be more mainstream. Again, in our pews, there's people that are hurting, and there is this idea that, again, out of sight, out of mind. You get over, you just pray, get over it, move on, and don't talk about it. And so, like Vicky was saying with the young girl, with the abortion-minded girl who had no idea that her mother had an abortion, you just don't, it's just kind of a secret. And then sometimes with us Black pro-lifers, I've noticed that we can be more focused on our, just coming from a political perspective, to try to talk to Black people about, and we don't start at the heart of the issue, which is, which is our humanity. Because when we, as Black people, when we accept that abortion is okay and is acceptable, I mean, we are reaffirming the idea that there are human beings of less value and worth. And so we're reaffirming those ideas that even racist individuals may have against us, those ideas that Jim Crow fought against, those ideas that were prevalent during slavery. the reason for the Civil War and these things. So we are reiterating the ideas that have been perpetuated against us throughout American history. So
Yeah.
Right.
Do you find, I know you shared a little bit earlier your experience in being a Black woman who is pro-life. Do you find that you get pushback within African American circles being pro-life? And I know you said you had some people that reach out to you who's, have shared past abortions, and they're reaching out to you, and obviously in a positive way, but you get some negative reactions too, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it becomes, so you get what happens is the more outspoken, it's some people are just quiet and they'll just, they disapprove quietly, but then you have the people who, call you the traitors and the Uncle Toms and the sellouts and the coons, and that you're just playing along with the fight. They think that you are, again, think about that. Like I said, I'm really glad that you talked about the systemic racism thing early, the idea of it, because they, again, kind of going back to that, there are these disparities sometimes in a general sense with some economic issues and things like that, even though that's not always an issue of injustice. It's just sometimes that's just how things are for certain reasons. But it's almost like, okay, pro-life that's a white conservative evangelical issue.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted to get to, is that this idea that, it is a Republican Democrat issue, and that's why there's this kind of unwillingness to address the issue of abortion in the Black community. So you're kind of reiterating that, I guess.
Well, yeah, it's like, because the idea is that, okay, if you're Black, you should be fighting for things like, equal pay and reparations and Black rights and these sort of things, and Black, you should be fighting for, against the legal system, and things like that, or neighborhood, should be fighting for neighborhood development and poor minority communities, and for the school system, public school system in the inner city, fighting for abortion. That is, again, that's a white evangelical middle upper class issue. That's their fight, and you are ignoring your community by being a part of that. So that becomes the idea. And so, but I think through educating, I mean, I have several, Black friends that were not pro-life, and just because they never thought about it. They just thought, oh, it's not something I would do, but if somebody wants to do it, they can do it. So that's the beauty of understanding, some pro-life apologetics and some training and how to have conversations. Because a lot of times that happens in conversations one-on-one and through messages and texts and phone calls and things like that. So that's why I'm still going to say what I have to say. And because there are people who are being affected and who are hearing it, there's some people who are going to call you the sellout because they believe that you have sold out your people and the causes that are important to us, and that you are focusing on abortion. Again, because we don't talk about abortion as a community, and we don't talk about the devastating effects of abortion on our community, right? And so it can be kind of multifaceted, the responses. But there are people who are seeing the truth and seeing the light. And so I always regardless, truth is truth. And we have to stand on, trust God in the process. So
well, thank God we've got a godly woman like you, and you're speaking out in the way that you are, and you're able to just confront these issues head on and bring the gospel into the equation, or at the forefront of the conversation, because that is ultimately what's going to change the issue of racism and the issue of abortion and whatever other sins we deal with as human beings. It's the gospel.
Yeah. Well, even with racism, we have to talk. I mean, when in conversations, I mean, you can say racism is a sin. I may not be racist, but there's sins in my heart, right? And we all have sin of some sort. And so God is good, God is perfect, He's holy, and He can save anybody, and so even through racism, God can penetrate hearts and change hearts. But it is seen as the issue of our day, and as the kind of the unforgivable sin. Personally, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a sad reality. It's like, even again, me as a white Christian man, like, I don't know what I can say and what I can't say without, getting in the PR police after me. So I just say what I feel like the word of God says and just let the Lord deal with it.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
it's a difficult time to live in as far as the things that you feel like you can say, the truth that you
Yeah.
feel like you can say without having a terrible backlash. And of course, we've seen some of that in media and all of that recently.
Well, the abortion is, I mean, the abortion clinic that is a war zone already. And then you add a racial tension war on top of that that's going on in media. And it's just the perfect storm for, an explosion almost.
Yeah,
And
It
yeah.
is, but from a positive aspect, I see what's happening out at the abortion center in many ways as being like on a microcosm, the way to heal racial tension, because I think overwhelmingly, at least the sidewalk counselors I know, love people because they're people made in the image of God, and they are reaching out to these women not because they're black or white, but because they're women who are in a desperate place, feeling that killing their child is an answer, and we have a different answer, a godly, gospel driven answer, and we help.
absolutely.
And so I
Right.
think it connects them to our humanity, and we're connected to their humanity, which what I'm hearing you saying is the
Yeah.
absolute crucial thing to do.
Well, when
And
something
that
comes to
happens
an abortion,
regularly out there.
yeah. Well, and those, you see that all the time, and people don't. That's one thing people don't see. Oh, white people don't care, and these things. But then I see, you, Vicky, you guys on the RV with this young lady. Think about this: when a woman comes to an abortion clinic, or a young girl comes to an abortion clinic, that's probably the lowest point of her life, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you're there being Christ's hands and feet and meeting her there, and standing there for her in the gap. So talk about, I mean, if you want to talk about a picture of love, of true love, of sacrificial love, of love for humanity, of if there's any sort of picture of love, racial unity and love, it's on that sidewalk.
Right.
As
Yeah.
people are reaching across racial lines to save lives, to literally save lives, and to offer hope, help, resources, and a total change in direction in one's life. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate you. That's actually a great note for us to end this podcast on.
Absolutely.
Very encouraging, Melissa. It's very encouraging having you on, and it's very enlightening to hear your perspective. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that. If people want to get in touch with you and Devin, how do they get in touch with you?
Sure. You can email us, Melissa Pellew at ratiochristi.org. I know that's a mouthful between my name and our ministry.
Yeah, I'll put it in. I'll put it in the show notes at the bottom of the podcast. A link there to you guys.
Yeah, and I do talks, and Devin does. We do pro-life apologetic talks, helping people to think through the issue of abortion, how to defend the pro-life position, but then also, the race issue, the issue of race, talking about race and racial reconciliation. That's something that's very much on my heart, and abortion is a part of those presentations that I do. It has to be, because it is, again, the number one killer of Black people, and it has to be an issue that's addressed and talked about.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Melissa, again, I appreciate you coming on. We're going to wrap this thing up, and
all right.
I appreciate you guys who listen. And just if you need to get in touch with me, it's dparks@citiesforlife.com. You get in touch with Vicky, it's vcasiorg@citiesforlife.com. And Melissa shared her contact info there. So guys, we appreciate you guys listening. Hopefully you'll share this podcast. Hopefully it was a blessing to you. Until next time, God bless.
Give me an outlet for love. Give me an outlet for gratitude. I know it will cost me my life, but nothing's too precious since I met you.